Namaskar, welcome back. So, this was the last slide of previous lecture where we stopped and we were discussing about the thrust fault scarp from Kutch region. So, basically after identifying the scarps, we go for trenching. This we have already discussed in the field techniques and lab technique part previously, but we will just have a glimpse of that what we did. Okay. So, this was the scarp where the trench was been open. Okay. And trench, this part I have already discussed, so I will just move forward that how we try to identify the different litho units. And before going into identification of different litho units or sedimentary units, we need to clean the trench rigorously. Either you clean it with spraying the water on the trench to clean the dust, or you use brushes to clean it and then demarcate the boundaries, that is the bounding surfaces between different sedimentary units exposed in the trench, and also look for the cross cutting relationship, and that is what we call the unconformities. Where are the breaks we see in the litho units, that has to be clearly identified and demarcated. So, as I have already presented this, but few slides we will repeat so that we have the continuity. So, before going for trenching, at least we also usually go for geophysical mapping actually, and this is what we see right now is the GPR profile, which was been collected across the scarp, which clearly indicates the faults over here. So, that also helped us in identifying the deformation, a near surface deformation. Now, in a broader sense, if we take in terms of the Himalayas and all that, so we have the topography, which is like up and down. So, you have anticline, syncline, you see across, if you go across from south to north in the Himalayan region, and that is because of the geometry of the subsurface fault system. So, the décollement what we have, or we can say the branching out fault system which is coming up, is not a very straight feature in terms of in vertical sense. Okay, it is not a very straight geometry. It will bend, and then you have again coming up with a different angle, and that what we call is ram and flat structure. So, this ramp and flat structure also reflect the topography on the surface. So, wherever you are having, for example, it has been given here with the yellow is the flat. Okay. So, flat you will have a sort of an basin, but as you have the ramp, then you may see a sort of an formation of the folds, okay, over there. So, ramp and flat structure is well established for the Himalayan uh, domain, and this is what you will see in sort of an flat and ramp structure. So, another thing which usually is been seen in the fold and thrust build is the faults will bend at near to the surface, and then will start dragging onto the flat region. Okay. Now, this was been observed in one of the trench which we exposed, but that was a secondary deformation, but the pattern of deformation remains the same in sense in the process, overall process remains the same actually. So, this is the typical of fault bend folding actually. So, you have the ramp here, and then it becomes a flat here. So, this deformation which is coming right here will be something like you will be able to see a deformation over here. Okay. So, now, let us see what we were able to identify in field after the 2001 uh, Bhuj earthquake. So, this is on a very miniature scale, but can be correlated with on a larger scale for the Himalayan domain. Okay. So, this was in the epicentral area where we saw a sort of an landslip, and that is what we call lateral spread, and that lateral spread resulted into the deformation at the toe of the complete landslide. Okay. So, what we observed was very interesting, that you have a, so there is a thin whitish line over here. Now, this represent the surface, that means this surface which existed before the deformation. So, this is the surface, and we were able to differentiate easily because this was there was a salt encrustation little bit, because in Great Run of Kutch you usually see the salt encrustation surfaces. So, this part we were able to easily pick up, and if you carefully look at the geometry, then what we have is that this is, there is an angle here. So, you have an angle here of the fault geometry. Of course, this deformation is not the primary causative deformation related to the earthquake, but it is a secondary deformation, but process remains the same. Okay. Then you get into the flat surface here, then again slowly getting into the ramp here. So, this is your flat, and this one, sorry, this one is your ramp, okay, ramp structure, and this is flat. So, what we see is a clear indication, or you can say the manifestation of the topography on the surface. Okay. So, we have when we have this ramp, okay, then we have a topography which is developed over here on the top, and then we get into a sort of an small saddle type structure, and that is because of the flat. Okay. So, this part uh, uh, this evidence when we saw, uh, because there was a deformation, clear cut warping of the surface and all that in that sense, and then in the southern side we had an extensional cracks. Okay. So, we wanted to see that what is the sort of deformation we were able to pick up. So, this was clear cut fault bend folding which we came across, okay, over here. So, such type of deformation is been seen on a larger scale also in Himalayas. So, this is a typical example of fault bend folding, or we can also say that this is a ramp fault fold. So, further close up of this makes things very easy and clear. So, wherever you are having a sort of a flat area, then you have a depression over here. Okay. So, you have depression, and this depression on a larger scale will mimic to your uh, syncline, or you can say the valleys. Okay. And when you are having a ramp here, then you have this fold. So, we also keep uh, uh, in mind when we are excavating the trenches and trying to understand that what is the deformation pattern in the trench. Okay. So, this is a sketch of that which shows clearly the deformation, and another trench which we dug here was also a good one, but anyway that is not right now with me. Now, let us move to the fault propagation fold, how it usually has been seen and formed. Of course, here also the process remains the same, that is flat and ramp structure is there. So, you have so if the folds are formed at the tip of or the propagating end of the thrust fault, then we term this as an fault propagation folds. Okay. So, as I told that this the deformation pattern what we saw in the trench, we that type of information or the understanding we keep in our mind when we are opening the trenches, because that helps us in understanding the pattern of deformation. So, below is the sketch of one of the trench, which shows that there is an folding which is taking place along the tip of the thrust fault. Okay. So, here you will see a sort of unfolding, and that is what we call fault propagation folding. So, if we have to look at also the secondary faulting associated with thrust faulting events, then secondary faulting and other features are seen commonly associated with the uh, bending moment fault, okay, flexure slip fault, and then you are having bending moment fault is related to the reverse faulting, where the bending along the fault plane result into formation of fold on the surface. So, this part we have already discussed in the previous slide. Okay. Now, there are few very good examples from which we are going to discuss in this part is from the Al Asnam 1980 earthquake in Algeria, and that gave us like an complete set of evidence that what different type of deformational features you will come across during the same earthquake. Okay. So, we will see that, but here the secondary faulting or the features which usually we will come across with the fault bend folding will be the surface. You will see the extensional cracks development, and this is very simple fundamental which usually we use in civil engineering and all that, or rock deformation. Okay. Extensional cracks, or you can say even the fractures will be developed. Okay. So, it will not be going deeper, okay, but it will be in this, because this portion is in tension. So, this will break, and then that is very clearly seen or commonly seen if you have this type of deformation. Okay. So, these faults are usually short and projected to the shallow depth. So, it will not go deeper, okay, and do not penetrate deep into the crust. So, this will be superficial secondary deformation usually we will come across. Okay. So, for example, this is these are all secondary faulting from the Al Asnan trench which has been seen, and they are not deep seated. Okay. They are just, and they are seen that they extend up to a few meters and then vanish. Okay. It is not seen, but this is because of the flexuring which has been seen. So, if you have a sort of flexuring like this, okay, then you may come across extensional features on the surface. Okay. So, this type of faulting is very common in the faulting. So, overall you see then you have a sort of bending over here. Okay. So, you can see the superficial faulting associated with the ongoing deformation. So, you may have normal faulting in a thrust faulting environment also, or you can say the compressional tectonic environment. This again from the Al Asnam earthquake. So, we will see couple of examples from this region. Now, flexure slip faults. Okay. Formation of flexures on the surface related to faulting. Okay. So, secondary deformation are formed due to sudden bending of thick layered sequence. Such faults are accompanied by slip along the bedding planes in the fold limbs during the deformation. Okay. Are rooted in the axis of fold, that is here. If you say this is the fold here, then this will be rooted in the axis only. Okay. It will not go, but you may have the slip along the bedding. Okay. If you have the beds, very prominent beds, then you may experience slip over here also, okay, along the limbs. Okay. Wherever this fault cuts the surface, they produce scarp, okay, and such features mimic those features produced by tectonic surface faulting. So, one has to be very careful that what is the overall deformation you are looking at, whether this is in complete extensional tectonics or you are having flexure folding is taking place, and this type of secondary faulting has been seen only on the surface. It is not related to the main fault or the displacement along the main fault. Okay. So, further the secondary faults developed over the flexure or fold formed due to bending moment or flexure slip are not considered as seismogenic faults. Okay. So, these are not seismogenic faults. Seismogenic faults means that the faults are capable of triggering earthquakes, okay. But these faults are the secondary faults which are just associated with the co-seismic deformation, but this is nothing. These faults are not capable at all to trigger an earthquake. Okay. However, the fault causing the flexure or warping on the surface is seismogenic. So, if you have an fault which is resulting into the flexuring on the surface, so fault may be somewhere over here. Okay. So, there is a movement here, but you will be able to see a sort of a secondary faulting on the axial part of the fold. Okay. Now, as I just mentioned that in Kutch we saw a secondary deformation, and then but we wanted to see that how this overall process has resulted into the topography which was developed because of the landslip. Okay. And this was very interesting trench we did, very shallow, not very deep trench, hardly 1.5 meter or so, but we were able to pick up a process of a deformation where we also saw the sort of a back thrust. Okay. So, these are all back thrust. So, movement was along here, okay, but there was a back thrust here where this got intruded into this. Okay. And at the same time on the surface also we were able to see the extensional cracks. Another photograph will be the sketch, if you see carefully, then we have a fault here and then it bends. So, this is something over here and then it goes like this, and at the same time we also have the deformation and there is a back thrusting over here, and you see an extensional cracks. Okay. So, this type of deformation can be seen in on the larger scale also in like locations like Himalayan region or any thrust and fold belt region. Okay. So, this was from the 2001 Bhuj earthquake, but again this was not a causative or seismogenic fault. Okay. Now, thrust faults, usually we say that forms of the thrust fault scarps, okay, different forms of this, and as I told that the one of the best example we have is from the Alasnam 1980 earthquake, where we got variety of deformation, and that deformation was related to the geometry of the fault. Okay. So, that is the nutshell of the part which we are going to discuss. Okay. So, forms of the thrust fault scarps are more varied as compared to any other fault types. Okay. Due to complex nature of low angle faulting and folding, as we have seen in two examples, one is the you have fault bend folding and then fault propagation folding and all that. So, what we will see is that whenever there is a bend or there is we also correlated that with the ramp and flat structures, and on the axial portion of the folds what you will come across. Okay. So, you have a low angle because thrust we usually say that it is less than 45 degrees. So, low angle faulting, and at the same time you see the associated folding which is taking place. Second part is due to the complex response of the surfacial material. Now, if you remember well, in one of the lectures where we were talking in the extensional tectonic environment, and I told that the fault displacement which result into the formation of the scarp, that will also depend on the material property. So, if you are having harder rocks, you may come across a very steep angle faulting. But if you are having a softer material, you may see a low angle in that. So, one is the complex nature of the angle. Second is the superficial material. Third is the amount of slip which has been taken up along the fault, and then the sense of slip. So, there are few things which we will keep in mind, and then we will move ahead in understanding the overall features which one can expect during a thrust in a thrust faulting environment. So, Philip et al. In 1992 they came across a different type of thrust faulting scarps, and this was from 1980 Spitak Armenian earthquake. I am sorry for the saying that it was Algerian earthquake, but this was from Armenia. Now, they saw that because of this complex nature and different parameters, if you try to, or the components you try to incorporate, then the faulting not the faulting pattern, but the scarp formation will change from place to place. Where you have the amount, sense of slip, then geometry, then the material, and the angle, of course, that is the geometry part. So, they gave almost like 7 different type of fault scarps they came across during 1988 earthquake, and which shows an sort of an different geometry of faulting and all that, where you can see, and of course, the material also. So, we can look at one by one. So, one what they say that this is your bedrock, the symbols which are been used here is the bedrock. Then second is the soft sediments. So, bedrock with the soft sediments, then what type of deformation they were able to identify, and if there is in bedrock only, then what type of deposits or what type of faulting they be able to see on the surface, and the third is they will say the surface. Now, let us see. So, this portion, like it is marked everywhere, is the surface you are looking at. So, A, if we see, then of course, in the compressional tectonic environment, or the simple thrust or reverse scarp are produced by steeply dipping reverse faults in the bedrock. So, this since it was a bedrock, then you were able to see a steeply dipping reverse fault. And this, if you see, this is your bedrock. Now, second is you have the hanging wall collapses. So, steep fault in brittle unconsolidated material. So, this part we, if you remember, we discussed in one of the example where we were looking at that there is a gravelly material on the surface, and then there was some sort of an colluvial which came out, but the scarp was very clearly standing. It was exposed and it remained for a longer period. But in case of the loose material, then we had blocks which are coming out here, and then scarp was degraded very fast. So, that difference was because of the material. So, hanging wall collapses, hanging wall collapse scarp, second one, or B1. So, we have the steep faults. Faulting is of course because of the bedrock and thin cover of that. So, you have this faulting, but at the same time you see a sort of an fallen blocks over here because of the unconsolidated material sitting on the bedrock. So, this is bedrock here you are having, and then unconsolidated material has been collapsed because of the seismic shaking. C is your simple pressure ridge, okay, and is produced due to low angle thrust faulting. However, development of pressure ridge depends on the material rheology and the magnitude of slip also. Okay. So, in the C1 figure, if you see, then what we have is that you have a fault and then you have a bending here, okay, and that exactly what we were able to see in Kutch also. So, then typical of that, and then what material you have, this is a bedrock here, and then on top you have the soft sediments. Okay. So, you have soft sediments here. Then coming to the D part, more brittle material produces fissures in the leading edge of thrusted sheets. If displacement is more, if the slip is more, okay, it may result into the formation of secondary normal faults. So, here you have, till it was in the bedrock, it was quite steep. Then as soon as it enters into the softer material, because this is your softer material and this is your bedrock, then it starts bending, okay. And then if this drag is more, okay, along the fault, then you will see a sort of an formation of extensional cracks. Also, what another part which we can see is this one, okay. So, that is your, this one is your back thrust or even normal faulting, which we can say, okay. So, extensional cracks will be seen, but these are the secondary features, okay. Now, let us see E and F. Okay. So, before that, this was the example which we have already discussed, and this is the case of your very clear scarp which has been seen here. Of course, the material is not very soft, but then also the blocks are been seen fallen down. Okay. So, reverse fault scarp produced by 1971 San Fernando Californian earthquake. Okay. The hanging wall, what you see here. Okay. So, this is the A part, which is the hanging wall scarp with fall plane almost up to 65 degrees, very like an high angle collapsed material you can see over here. Okay. So, this part we have already discussed about the extensional cracks and all that, okay, how it will develop in the fault bend folding. Now, coming to the another example from Himalayas. Okay. So, this part we will discuss in more detail. We will stop here and we will discuss in more detail. We will continue from here. Okay. And this is actually again a similar pattern of deformation is there. The overall process is the thrust faulting environment or the compressional tectonic environment. We will see this in the next lecture. Till then, thank you so much. Namaskar.